Strap on in and light the fuse. This is the saga of Snake Plissken, the one-eyed outlaw who rewrote the rules of what it meant to be a hero. In a dying world, Snake became the rebel who moved like the smoke itself, untouchable and unforgettable. He couldn't care less that we're talking about him, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be talking about him. His legend needs to be known, so let's explore the story of the man who everyone thought had died and yet somehow managed to make it out, be it surfing through the waves or flying the Wing 5 over Leningrad. Let's explore the insane life of Snake Plissken. Before we get into this exploration, we do have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to the channel. A small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin.
He's not even here, he's a hologram.
I heard you were dead. The legend of Snake Plissken. Snake Plissken, here we go again. Who can forget the time when John Carpenter gave us one of the best films ever with Escape from New York and introduced us to the masterful creation that is Snake Plissken. The eye-patched hero became a defining element of action cinema history, with his gruff voice and don't-care attitude only adding to the charm and grit. At a time when action heroes were known for taking sides and kicking ass, Snake Plissken came as an anti-hero who wasn't interested in doing good, but it's just one of those things that ends up happening on the way. Added to Carpenter's writing as a lasting symbol of the post-Vietnam, post-Watergate American disillusionment, Kurt Russell brings a different energy to the character. Even though it was a bold choice for an actor with a Disney background, Russell has now solidified that only he can be Snake Plissken because he is the character. The actor surely took inspiration from many movies, which is quite well established here, but he somehow managed to create something that looks and feels entirely original. It was so original that the character became a source material for other characters with similar shades of gray while being the savior at the end of the day. The fact that his arc isn't explored in the typical exposition format and that he opts to meet random people and give us tidbits only adds to the character's badassery. Imagine everyone you meet remembering you for being an absolute legend while fighting you to the death. Who is Snake? Well, even though we don't know much about him, we know that St. Bob Snake Plissken is a legend who served in the US Army and achieved the rank of lieutenant. Yes, he could have just been Bob Plissken, which sounds like a snarly version of Peter Griffin or Homer Simpson, but thankfully, we never had to use the name Bob. Thankfully, we only ever knew him as Snake, although it would have been kind of interesting to have Solid Bob as the main character from the Metal Gear games. I mean, that sounds kind of awesome. But yeah, that's how influential the character was. It managed to spawn a character in a game and even a bunch of comic books, and in a rather controversial angle, a Guy Pearce movie where he plays a somewhat different version of Snake. As you can see, navigating through the vast amount of material will be quite difficult, so we're going to take some liberties and have an alternate version of the character's arc. So sit tight and enjoy as we walk you into the life of the legendary anti-hero king of badassery, Snake Plissken. Escape from New York. Enter the anti-hero. The year is 1997, and the United States is settling into the role of the ideal dystopian world, with crime reaching such levels that the government decided to change things by implementing the idea of turning Manhattan into a maximum security prison. At the same time, the police were converted into the United States Police Force, a militarized and brutal rendition commanded by a president who gets all the hate possible from whatever we can call the citizens of the state. So this one time, our beloved president was hanging out in his pod when he landed in what we can call the danger zone, the prison city of Manhattan. With an international peace summit looming around the corner, it becomes rather important to save the president, or else it's gonna be World War III. Who you gonna call? Snake Plissken, a war hero turned into a criminal with a lot more experience of Manhattan than his recruiters might have known about. But some of you might not know about this one. Snake was caught for robbing the Denver Federal Reserve Depository with his friend Bill Taylor. Bill got shot in the process, and Snake would be taken to the New York Maximum Security Penitentiary, and finally, his fate would lead him to the adventure of a lifetime for us and a boring old job for him. Aware of his legend, Commissioner Bob Hawke offers Snake the job, the catch being that he would be pardoned, and that's all Snake wanted. He had no interest in patriotism or justice. Snake takes the job, but with his history not being very good, Hawke decides to put an explosive charge on his neck with a ticking clock, and thus starts Snake's adventures in Manhattan, a wolf in a cage full of other wolves. Snake is dedicated to his mission because of the ticking clock, not wasting an ounce of time and walking across the ruins of New York completely unimpressed by the state of things. Once or twice, someone identifies him, but Snake doesn't care for wasting words or energy. Along the way, he comes across a couple of misfits: Cabby, the chatterbox with the cab and the playlist; Brain, a friend from the past; and Maggie, maybe the toughest one in this hellscape. Brain, whose real name was Harold Hellman, had some serious history with Snake when he left Snake and Fresno Bob for dead by double-crossing them during a job in Kansas City. Yes, Snake has some history in this hellish version of New York, but it becomes clear to him that no one is interested in being an ally. Going through some gladiator fights in crumbling subways, Snake lands in front of the Duke of New York, a formidable enemy who wants to use the president for his own purposes. But Snake manages to battle him and get the president back to safety out of the city, but at a cost. There's something about Snake, promises, and friends because they just don't go well together. None of his friends made it out of the mess, and the promises that were made to him fell through, even though he managed to complete the mission unscathed. So, as a final act of defiance, Snake did something unthinkable that will probably have grave repercussions for the nation already in turmoil. As the president makes it to the big speech, it turns out that Snake had switched his tape with one of the cabbies' songs. So Snake's not here, he's just Snake Plissken, someone who doesn't give a damn. And that's a pretty good rebel in a world filled with lies. John Carpenter's Snake Plissken Chronicles, a thing for presidents. Just minutes after being pardoned and released from imprisonment, Snake, driving a military Humvee, decided to head back into crime again to complete that one heist he had planned before getting caught. So, the man was back in town, leaving the chaos of New York and the rotten stench of politics behind him. Even though his last heist, not the president one, seems to have failed, Snake had another job, a score to settle. What was the heist? Well, it seems we won't be missing the presidential aspect because Snake has to get the 1961 Lincoln Continental in which President John F. Kennedy was assassinated. The historic car had been turned into a grotesque casino centerpiece in Atlantic City, but the buyer didn't care as he had a taste for the macabre. All Snake had to do was get this piece of history to the buyer, and like many of his past adventures, Snake managed to get a partner, and this time it was Mars, a sharp-eyed hustler with a slippery persona that Snake should have taken into consideration. The duo managed to get to the casino, get the car, and get away, and it felt like everything was going according to plan, until Mars turned out to be very much in league with Snake's past associates. He takes his opportunity and snags the car. Snake is captured in a crab trap and dropped right into the ocean, but one should always check before thinking they're done with Snake, as he managed to survive the fall, get back to the surface, and come across Captain Ron. Now, generally, Snake manages to get lucky and people help him because of his legend, but Ron wasn't going to be that easy to please, and the captain rejected Snake's request. Snake was going to use Plan B before a Russian mob entered the scene, and it became clear that Ron had some debts to pay. So, before Ron was killed, Snake comes to his rescue, and lo and behold, Snake gets the opportunity to return to his task. Snake takes on the tides and makes it back to the casino, but it turns out that Mars also made it there, and as they come across each other, bullets roar, glass shatters, and an interesting car chase comes into the action. After much trouble, Snake manages to get his hands on the car, and inside was an actress who had been hired to play Jackie Kennedy. Yeah, that's pretty messed up, but Mars had survived, and the casino owner had given him a mission now to get the car back. Everything wasn't wrapped up just yet though, because when Snake delivered the vehicle, Mars shows up, and this time he was hungry and unhinged. What happens in the end? Snake left the mess with 30 million credits in a chopper, continuing his legend. As for the fates of Captain Ron and Mars, it wasn't fair, but they had it coming anyway. Snake's not here to make friends or enemies because he just doesn't care. Thus ended another chapter in the life of Snake Plissken, the man rumored to be dead. Escape from LA. Return to the fire. Well, Snake doesn't like doing favors for people. He does manage to create an image that, given the chance, he might be the best person for a mission that somehow puts the fate of the Earth in the balance. So we know that when the world's in trouble, Snake will be called back into action. The year is 2013, and things have only gotten worse with the effects of the war and terror triggering a global crisis, and this time it was earthquakes tearing through America, or whatever was left of it. Based on the mountains of Lynchburg, Virginia, the president for life was looking over whatever was left of this theocracy. Where did the prisoners, the criminal elements get sent to? Los Angeles. Turned into what can be called some version of a nightmare following the earthquake's impact, LA was basically a ruin that was being ruled over by a warlord, washed up celebrities, and last but not least, plastic surgery mutants. And along with them were well-armed revolutionaries with a terrible taste for fashion. Once again, the government dropped something in this corner of the world and they wanted someone to go in and grab it for them. Enter Snake Plissken, the president's daughter, Utopia, yep, that's her name, managed to steal a black box called the Sword of Damocles, a weapon that could fry every electronic item across the globe. Utopia took this device and brought it to our friend Cuervo Jones, a revolutionary with a god complex and an army of the damned. So yeah, even though Snake couldn't care less about the politics of the circumstances, he was arrested and dropped onto the island, and instead of killing him, he was given the job to retrieve the Sword of Damocles. This time, they decided to up the game by injecting him with a virus that only gave him 10 hours to live, another leash on his neck to finish a job he didn't care for. But things get more interesting this time as Snake faces the natural calamities and an army set out to kill him. Surfing the tsunamis, Snake managed to land on enemy ground, and by now, you might have guessed that the mission was somewhat similar to the last time the government hired him. Snake continued this mission and got into gladiator-like fights in the post-surgical Colosseum. He would also reunite with Hershey Les Palmas, a warlord and former lover who had become a queenpin. But in this ruined version of LA, she was a powerful gang leader and had her army of people, much like our friend Cuervo Jones. Yeah, all these people had larger-than-life personas, but Snake was the only one who remained bigger throughout his interactions with them. But as he continued with the mission, it became more and more clear that this was a hoax, and the virus he had been injected with wasn't real at all. The cowardly president wanted to manipulate Snake into saving the corrupted elite of whatever remained of this society. So even though Snake would continue with his mission, he wouldn't forgive those who put him into the fire. Finally, after he'd managed to come across the president again with the world-killing device in his hand, Snake made a choice that was much akin to his previous decisions in such scenarios. Snake activated the device because he was bored enough and wanted to shut it all down. Thus, the 21st century blinked out. Welcome to the human race. And with that, Snake lit his cigarette, and the world should have known this was coming. After all, they had made him go through the same trouble again to save the world. But why should he bother saving the world was a question that bothered Snake. And the moment the world crossed the line, Snake was ready with his answer. What happened to Snake after that? Nobody knows. But one thing is known. The whole world will continue to tell the legend of the man who went against the system when it tried to use him for its benefit. Snake Plissken's legend only burned brighter. Boom! Studio presents Escape from New York, Snake Plissken continues. There have been various stories about Snake Plissken. While some have fared better than others, Snake has continued to be a true legend. In case you're wondering how Snake's story ends, there might be an answer to that in an alternate storyline that takes us back to the events of when he was sent into whatever was left of New York to rescue the president. So for those of you who thought that the previous 2 chapters of his story weren't working out for you, maybe you remember him through a different story. One where we might get an answer for what Snake Plissken is. When the president realized the cassette had been replaced by the one with the Barry Manilow song, he ordered Hawk to bring Snake back, but Snake wasn't waiting around to watch the outcome of his devastating actions, and he had managed to get on a Humvee and planned to get away from there. Snake managed to get on a helicopter, even with all the forces dedicated to capturing him, but he managed to escape by fooling the forces and sneaking into the town without much trouble. Yes, Snake was finally free again, and yet he was back in a world where people would look at him and wonder how he was still alive. The legend was back in town, but the city had changed significantly since he had last been there, and even though Snake had a plan to get somewhere, the city would be a hassle for him. At first, he comes across a gang trying to get to Florida to experience life there because, according to them, Florida was a completely new system that had been taken over by the twins Remus and Romulus. Even though Snake had no interest, he would get to Florida, and his legend would end up working completely against him. As Snake entered Florida, he found out that these twins were mere kids, and these kids were actually excited to find Snake because they wanted to use him for their purposes. Though Snake resisted at first, it didn't do much for him, as these kids had a plan and were going through it while keeping him as their prisoner and military advisor. But what was their plan? They planned to nuke America with bombs that they had acquired and take over the rest of the states and make them their own, just like Florida. In this war-torn world, after the entire cassette debacle triggered by Snake, this wouldn't be the first time someone was planning to take over whatever was left of America. As the kids and their stepmother, a muscular woman, managed to use Snake to train their forces, Snake managed to plan a way out of this hellhole. He partnered up with another soldier to disable the nukes and also chalked out a plan to escape when the war was triggered. When the forces of the USPF came around the walls of Florida, they prepared for battle. Finding the right moment, Snake managed to sneak out with the rest of the soldiers and unite with those trying to put down Florida. The plan worked, and although it was completely unintentional, Snake managed to overthrow the crazy system that existed in Florida. But once again, it became clear that Snake might not be one of those good people, but he did end up up doing the right thing for the right people at the right time. However, his past actions would return to haunt him, as the same man he'd managed to drag out of the inferno of Manhattan, the president, had turned into his worst enemy. Snake would be painted as the architect of chaos and the man who triggered what would become World War III. They captured him and dumped him in Siberia, in an icy wasteland where he once fought some of his most legendary battles. As Snake starts walking these lands, the same legendary operations that Hawk had once mentioned begin to surface, and it's clear that the war has only made things worse for Snake. What did Snake do here back in his time? Well, for starters, he killed every enemy in sight and made sure he made it out alive. Once again, Snake was ready to do just that, and he joined the forces that were fighting back against the Russians there, and his experience turned out to be quite useful. The army had teamed up with the special forces on a specific mission, while the military was being used up without their knowledge. Snake could smell that there was a larger game at play, something far from the orders they were being given. Even though the leaders would hate Snake's tendency not to follow orders, Snake managed to make it through whatever trouble he faced, but he wasn't aware yet that someone else was also present here, armored up like a mechanical ghoul and snarling Snake's name with every breath: Hawk. After Snake had ruined the peace talks with his cassette switching, Hawk was subjected to extreme torture by the president's people and sent to Siberia. So Snake's coming here only meant that Hawk could avenge what he had to go through. As he waited for the ideal moment to strike, Snake had already smelled him in the wind, like another one of his regrets. But Siberia wasn't far from the ruins of America, because Snake's legend had reached a wide variety of the population, from an underground society that preached a stone god to an individual who might have created the one thing that could end all wars. We only wish we could have seen what Snake had done, a glimpse into the dark past that might not be known to everyone, but echoes in every breath he takes. So Snake somehow manages to get out of the icy hell and swim into Canada, the place he had been talking about ever since the beginning. After reaching there, he would reunite with a couple of his old war buddies, a momentary peace along with the smell of oil and whiskey. But that didn't last long, because the USPF was waiting for a chance to ambush him, and they managed to kill everyone present. Snake finally snapped. He had to kill the president, the same individual the system had forced him to save, and the same individual who's responsible for his present condition. Snake made it back to New York, the same streets where the skeleton of his legend continued to echo. But according to the stories, there was a new Duke in town. As Snake tried to get a glimpse, he saw his objectives pretty clear in front of him, as the Duke was no more than the very individual the previous Duke had managed to capture and hold captive, the president. After the events of the failed speech, the president had been impeached, but he wasn't going to sit back, and hence decided to play his own game, making way for himself to be the Duke of the ruins of New York. Snake saw the irony and then the threat and the force spinning the same old wheel again. He decided to tear it all down once more. Using his legend and past allies, Snake managed to reach the new Duke and crack down on his empire, but something still troubled him, so he used the Duke to escape the hell he had brought himself to. Thus ended the very chapter that had begun another world war, all because of a cassette that would deliver some lies and an option for the elite to make it out of the hell that was the United States. Seeing that his biggest mistake was now over, Snake decided to retire. Settling down with whatever he had, Snake made a place for himself and earned some money using past allies, and it was as if he was waiting for the legend to die down, for people to forget who Snake Plissken was. Maybe that would bring him some satisfaction and some calmness. For almost 15 years, his no traps, no turrets home near the city with a dog and a bed made him believe that the world had moved ahead without him. But the legend of Snake Plissken wouldn't die like that. A home invasion by a gang brought back everything that Snake was used to, and thus triggered the very individual that Snake was trying to forget, because that was the real Snake Plissken, someone who can't just retire, not while the world was burning its way to hell. So once again, he took to the road, but this time he wouldn't be the lone wolf. He decided to lead a new pack, becoming the last symbol of rebellion that hadn't sold out or stayed dead, and the world witnessed Snake again. This time around, they either wanted to wear his face or just hang it on the wall, but Snake couldn't care less. He fought for Cleveland's freedom, and Snake almost had a strong belief that he was going to win this time around, but this crazy world proved him wrong. Snake Plissken would fail, but this time he wouldn't retire. He became enemy number one on the list of the corrupt anarchist nation that America had become, and it almost feels like Snake doesn't mind anymore. Throughout his adventures, it often feels like there's an endless need to escape it, but to where? That's the question that appears to be bothering Snake too, as in the end, he goes back to fighting it out. He was last reported in New Vegas, entering into a tournament kind of thing, and even though the competition does sound exciting, Snake seems to have made quite the reputation for himself. In fact, he had been wearing a mask and going by the ridiculous name, The Shape, which makes sense because it sounds like something Snake would go for with the least effort. But on this particular day, he removes his mask and lets the world know Snake Plissken is yet to die. Snake Plissken's legacy. Snake might have vanished into the ruins of a dystopian America, but his echoes can be felt everywhere. Even though he was last seen making his way out of LA on the big screen, you'll see him grumbling through the wastelands in Mad Max with a busted moral compass and a haunted past that's not ready to leave him yet. He's in Riddick, the convict who turned into an unlikely savior. He's in The Mandalorian, a stoic gunslinger with a hidden code of honor beneath the armor. Whenever you see a reluctant anti-hero standing against a broken system, Snake's presence can be felt in his scarred, unshaven, and unimpressed persona. If you want something too close to Snake Plissken, then Guy Pearce's character, Snow, in Lockout, is basically wearing Snake's eye patch in spirit, from refusing orders to saving the day only because he feels like it. It might have been an homage, but John Carpenter sued the makers for ripping off his escape films and won because there's only one Snake Plissken. We almost saw Snake again with a third film that was planned for the character's return, Escape from Earth, and this time around we would have seen the repercussions of his past actions in a world that was reeling from the global blackout. Even Ghosts of Mars was supposedly intended to be a Snake Plissken adventure with the title Escape from Mars, and even though the creators deny this rumor, you can see how much Ice Cube's Desolation Williams echoes Snake with his entire persona. So it's clear that Snake only shows up when he wants. Somewhere at the edge of America's collapse, he'll be standing with his smokes, flipping the bird at anything that intends to bother him. In Kurt Russell's own words, "We started out doing some stuff that ended up not being in the movie with a train station sequence, sort of establishing the character of Snake, and he had a partner and got shot, and Snake actually ran back to help him. They caught them. It was a redeeming quality that we were showing." John Carpenter decided, rightly so, that Snake didn't have any redeeming qualities. After we did a couple of takes of that train sequence, he came over and he whispered, "This fucking character is great." I always felt that Snake was always just talking to himself. He was never really talking to anybody. That's Snake, and he lived through hell and walked out the other side with a cigarette in his mouth, and if he wants to do it all over again, maybe he will, if he feels like it. Because Snake isn't dead yet, he's just waiting for his next big escape. Marvelous verdict! And there you have it. There's the story of the character that ended up influencing cinema so much that even Bong Joon-ho fangirled in front of John Carpenter during their latest interaction. There might be a billion attempts at bringing him back, but what we will remember him for is definitely the masterpiece that Carpenter gave us, just like how people remember Snake for his legendary past. It's amazing how people tried to grab hold of the character and make him their own, but somehow they always forget that Snake was always about staying free in a world that tried to tame him. That's all we got for you this time, but if you enjoyed the content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Otherwise, thanks for watching, stay safe out there, and have a marvelous day.